Coming up.
The long and the short of it is that Stripe has taken a posture in saying that it wouldn't pass the savings that were part of a deal reached by the government with Visa and MasterCards to lower the fee for small businesses. They wouldn't pass that along to their customers due to reintroduction of GST, HST taxes. If this is true, how come your other member companies that are payment processors haven't taken the same posture as Stripe?
Pricing regimes for these kinds of payments.
But the government's making a claim here that there's going to be this massive savings for businesses and small businesses with this fee. Yet most of your members aren't willing to pass it on. So if they're not willing to actually reduce their fees, then how is the savings going to get passed on? Isn't this a fake release in the sense that most of your members aren't actually going to agree with the government, including one of the companies whose board member is the de facto finance minister of this government?
So essentially what's happened here is that the government changed the definition of financial services to exclude credit card surcharge revenue, making these payments eligible for GST, HST, then turned around and made the deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses, but those savings really went to offset Stripe's loss in profit due to the tax change. Seems reasonable to conclude that, right? Wouldn't it?
It might.
So the Liberal Minister of Revenue in 2023 changes the rules and allows the credit card processing fees now to be included in the GST, HST charges where they weren't before, correct? That's what you confirmed?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Pursuant to the motion adopted Thursday, September 19th, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on the credit card practices and regulations in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll direct my questions to FinTech Canada. Thank you for coming here and for the work that you guys do. One of your member companies is Stripe, a payment processor, and in a series of articles this week, including one by the National Post, the long and the short of it is that Stripe has taken a posture in saying that it wouldn't pass the savings that were part of a deal reached by the government with Visa and MasterCards to lower the fee for small businesses. They wouldn't pass that along to their customers. One of the rationale on their website that they've used for this is that they said that their costs have increased, a 0.036 increase in standard pricing due to reintroduction of GST, HST taxes. If this is true, how come your other member companies that are payment processors haven't taken the same posture as Stripe?
It's a great question, and I think it's because a few things. Just because interchange fees are changing doesn't mean the overall pricing model of any given payment processor has to change. That's because the market for payment processing, especially credit cards, is fairly competitive, fairly well developed, and there's a lot of differentiation in the market. Firms don't just compete with each other on the basis of price, they also compete with each other on the basis of value added.
So can I back up just on something you said? So you said that payment processors aren't obligated to pass that savings along. Why do you think that the government didn't mandate the passing of savings along? I guess for me it seems like a bit of a shell game if these savings are supposed to be passed along to small businesses and then they're not. They're essentially just going to cover the operating costs or the profit of these payment processors. So why do you think that the government didn't elect to say this must be passed along through payment processors?
So I'd be speculating. I wasn't talking to the government about why they didn't mandate the pass-through.
Did any of your member companies take a posture to ask you to ensure that the government would not pass any savings along? Did any of your member companies say we need to make sure that the government doesn't force us to pass these savings along to our customers?
No.
Okay. Has this ever come up in any discussions with any of your member companies? And any of your executive?
Occasionally, we will talk about the various issues that are going on, but the debit and credit card code of conduct is not something that we've been asked to engage on, and it's not something we had a seat at the table in.
Okay.
We focus primarily on other issues in the financial sector, mostly payments modernization and open banking.
Thank you. Senior Liberal fundraiser, Mark Carney, he just put out a large fundraising ask for the Liberal government. He's rumored to be a leadership contender and has now been appointed to be a senior economic advisor without any sort of firewall. Have you ever had any interaction with Mr. Carney?
No.
Okay. Has he, are you aware of any advocacy that he has made on behalf of Stripe for this particular issue?
I'm not.
Okay. As far as the rest of your member companies are concerned, I would be, if I was sitting on one of their boards, I'd be concerned that this line of questioning is coming up in this committee. Do you think it's problematic that we now have a narrative that could potentially involve lobbying of a senior Liberal fundraiser and one of your member companies, and the fact that they're not passing savings along? Do you see that as potentially problematic from an ethics perspective?
I don't know how to answer the question from an ethics perspective, but I often find it unfortunate when complicated issues are simplified to a point where they can't really be understood for what they are. The thing about the market for payment processing that I think is understood by experts, I mean, the Competition Bureau recently put out a report a few years ago on innovation in the financial sector, and one of the things that report said is that the market for payment processing is quite competitive.
Would you say that it's fair to say that in some cases, particularly Stripe, the decision that the government made to, reach that deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees, that it's now being absorbed by payment processors like Stripe, as opposed to being realized by small business owners?
I think I understand what you're asking. I think in a lot of cases, there are some savings being passed on to merchants, but in a lot of cases, the pricing, the overall pricing of a payment processor is not just based on the interchange fee. There are so many other things that payment processors do.
Just with the time I have left, do you think the government should have included payment processors like Stripe in their decision or in this deal that they reached with Visa and MasterCard, if the true motivation was actually to see savings be realized by small businesses?
I think the government should have invited more stakeholders to the table to talk about the implications of what they did.
That's fair. Thank you.
Are there any ongoing or proposed regulatory changes that you believe will affect the way that credit card data is reported and how that might impact the consumer credit scores?
Thank you for the question. One of the big areas where we're seeing some regulatory changes is around the ability for consumers in Canada to freeze or lock their credit reports so that the credit reports cannot be used for the purpose of applying for new credit accounts. And that actually started fairly recently in the province of Quebec with the passage of the Credit Assessment Agents Act. That is where we're seeing the majority of change in the regulatory environment. I'm not aware of any changes related to the data that is reported to Equifax specifically relative to credit card products.
My questions will be for the Executive Director of FinTech, the association representing, at least for the case of this study, the processors. Just so everyone who's watching is clear here, when somebody uses their credit card in a physical store, retail store, they don't know in most cases because it's only seen to the business, somewhere between 1.5% to 3% additional charge on the total value of that credit card is charged to the business. Is that correct?
Yes, there is an amount charged to the business, and Canadians aren't aware unless they know for one reason or another. For example, some businesses might choose to surcharge.
Okay. Thank you. And included in that is a whole bunch of things, but that's set by, in this case, we're talking about Visa, MasterCard, and then there are elements of that that are what are called the interchange fees, which are fees related to the actual pipes, as I call it, the plumbing of the companies that actually do all that processing, and those are your members, correct?
We have some members on the acquiring side processing payments for merchants and facilitating the use of those pipes, as you described it.
So when I look down the list, I think of your members. Chase Merchant Services, they're one of your members?
They aren't a member, but we do have various very
okay, and they've agreed to the discount. The government a year and a half ago announced that there would be a 9.95%, 1% essentially reduction in those rates. It's taken us a year and a half to get to this point where 2 weeks ago they announced it. So Chase is participating. Global Payments, are they one of yours members? They're agreed. Moneris, they're one of your members? No. Square?
They're a member.
TD Merchant Services, not one of yours. Okay, so all those have agreed. Apparently, Fiserv, are they one of your members? They have not responded to any requests. Do you know what Fiserv's going to do?
I don't know what Fiserv.
How about Nuvei?
I'm not sure what they're.
Are they one of your members?
Yes.
They haven't responded. People's Trust?
They're a member.
They're one of your members? Do you know what they're going to do? No. PSP Services, Inc. PSP Services, Inc., are they one of your members?
No.
Okay. So what we have here is 5 companies that have agreed, only one of which I think is yours. A number of your members who have not responded to the public announcement, meaning presumably, since they won't respond, they're not going to pass on these savings. And members, one member of yours, Stripe, which has publicly said they're not going to pass it on. So it sounds like most of your members aren't going to pass on the savings. Is that correct?
The ones who have not responded and have yet to elucidate what they're going to do, I don't know what they're going to do.
Okay, so maybe we should get them before the committee to explain why they haven't responded. So when a company, one of your members, doesn't pass the savings on, what happens to that Visa or MasterCard merchant fee? Does it go down?
So it depends on what sorts of services the merchant chooses to get. There are different pricing regimes for these kinds of
payments. But the government's making a claim here that there's going to be this massive savings for businesses and small businesses with this fee. Yet most of your members aren't willing to pass it on. So if they're not willing to actually reduce their fees, then how is the savings going to get passed on? Isn't this a fake release in the sense that most of your members aren't actually going to agree with the government, including one of the companies whose board member is the de facto finance minister of this government?
So again, I don't know what the ones who have not yet responded are going to do, but in some cases, the savings being promised might not actually come to fruition because the market for payment processing is much more complicated than an interchange fee. Just because you reduce an interchange fee doesn't mean other elements of that overall price are automatically going to fluctuate too. In some cases, some costs might go up. In a lot of cases, payment processors today compete with each other not just by reducing prices, but by offering value-added services, inventory management, stuff related to fraud detection and prevention, making it seamless, automated reconciliation. These sorts of things aren't going to be affected by an interchange fee.
So more than half, or most of your members, aren't committing to do this, yet the government claims it's actually going to reduce fees. If your members aren't going to reduce their fees, how do small business fees actually go down for credit card fees?
So the way...
If I don't subscribe to Moneris or one of these others.
The way you reduce payment fees is by introducing competition in the market for payment services, not by trying to micromanage one element of a big bundle of prices.
So the government's attempt to micromanage this one element isn't working and isn't going to work?
In some cases, it may not.
That's an incredible revelation, because we also have the CFIB claiming wildly that this is going to happen, when it appears that most of their members aren't going to see this benefit based on the fact that your members aren't willing to pass this on. And I presume MasterCard and Visa are not going to eat that savings that is required of the interchange fee just to be good people.
So I just wanted to be clear. I don't know what decisions many of the members will land on. I can't speak to whether they will or will not pass on the fees. As an association focused on public policy, we don't talk about these sorts of commercial matters.
And I know that the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment has identified financial abuse as a means of coercive control and intimate partner violence. And often women looking to leave abusive situations, either their credit has been impacted because of the control that the spouse had over the finances, or in other cases, they don't have the credit. Is there anything that you, and I'm also looking at the other witness, are doing, because they're calling on financial institutions to be more aware of these kinds of situations, because often this is why women stay in those relationships, because they're not able to get out financially.
Those sorts of situations are tragic. I venture to say probably not enough is being done. I'm not aware of any particular ideas or services any companies offer to help women get out of those situations, but I'd be happy to set up some time and talk with you and learn more about what we can do to be allies.
Is Equifax still there? If I could ask the same question?
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad that you brought this up, because this is an issue that I personally am quite involved with, and Equifax in general is as well. We know that survivors of human trafficking often end up with a lot of what we call coerced debt, which in a lot of cases takes the form of a credit account that was open in the survivor's name that she never knew about, or one that she did know about, but was never, if it was a credit card, she never saw the card, she was never able to use it, and she comes out of this situation owing debt that really isn't hers. What we're seeing is a move towards including coerced debt as a recognized form of fraud. And the Ontario government has actually passed some legislation around that, which puts the onus on financial institutions to have a process. And one of the suggestions I've heard is to use a process similar to what the guidelines are around finding potential elder abuse. There are a lot of possible parallels there that a lot of those guidelines that have been established might be able to be used or modified slightly for this scenario. So thank you for raising this. This is something that we're having a number of conversations about.
The U.S. Federal Trade Commission included a $425 million settlement to citizens. We had to use a class action lawsuit over here because we don't have the same systems in place or protections for consumers. What did American citizens receive for the loss of their privacy, which was consistent with the Canadians and UK citizens?
Thanks for the question. I'll have to be going from memory a bit here, as I don't have the specifics in front of me. I believe that the amount of money that was designated as part of that overall settlement was divided by the number of people who met the qualifications to be a part of that group. And so that resulted in certain amounts of money being transferred to impacted American consumers.
To FinTech, in 2023, the Canadian Revenue Authority changed the definition of financial services to exclude credit card surcharge revenue, making these payments eligible for GST, HST. They weren't obviously eligible prior to this. This was done by creating a special exception in the Excise Tax Act. Because of this change, all credit card surcharges paid on or after March 29th, 2023 are now subject to GST and HST. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. On its website, Stripe said they wouldn't be passing along the savings from the Liberal announcement of their deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses due to, quote, their credit card processing in Canada for businesses on standard pricing increasing by 0.036%, primarily due to the recent reintroduction of GST, HST taxes for certain for certain card network scheme fees. So that change on GST, HST eligibility would probably have significantly eaten into Stripe's profits, right?
I can't speak to how profitable or not Stripe is, but in general, when you slap a tax on something, you're going to increase the cost of it.
For sure. It's possible that Stripe, or is it possible that Stripe isn't passing along the savings from the government's deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees to small businesses to offset the change in this GST, HST eligibility? Do you think that's possible?
I couldn't possibly comment on that. It might be.
Maybe.
Not.
Probably. Why? I can't see why not. So essentially what's happened here is that the government changed the definition of financial services to exclude credit card surcharge revenue, making these payments eligible for GST, HST, then turned around and made the deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses, but those savings really went to offset Stripe's loss in profit due to the tax change. Seems reasonable to conclude that, right? Wouldn't it?
It might.
For small businesses that use Stripe, the deal with Visa and MasterCard to lower fees for small businesses is actually just a fake announcement that went to offset Stripe's tax burden. I think that's basically what we're kind of getting from this meeting here today. And small businesses can just pass that burden on to the customers, right? I mean, if the payment company is absorbing those costs, forcing the small businesses to have to pay them, then they can then download that onto the consumer, right?
It's possible. How costs are passed along in this complicated chain depends on so many different things and which parties we're talking about. But in theory, someone has to pay the price of that tax.
Yeah. Someone's got to pay it in the end, and it's always the consumer always loses is generally how this works. Stripe made $16 billion in profit last year and processed a global payment volume of $1 trillion. Why do you think the government didn't force them to pass the savings from their deal with Visa and MasterCard along to small businesses?
I don't know why they didn't force the processors to pass along the cost. They probably did everything they could to do it. But I think any policymaker that looks at this market, their first reaction is going to be, wow, this is really complicated. We can't just go in and tell companies what prices to set and not expect any unintended consequences. The market for payments is multi-sided. You can't affect prices here without also affecting prices over here. You can't give merchants a break without costing consumers more. You can't give consumers a break without costing merchants more. The government has probably realized that this is a game of redistribution. We can't make everyone win here. And this is why the history of credit card policy in this country, to me, seems like that famous definition of insanity, where we do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. We've been through many voluntary agreements, probably because we've realized we can't regulate, we can't make everyone happy. So, our perspective as an association is let's stop the madness and focus on actually promoting competition and innovation in this space, because that's what's going to drive down costs for businesses and consumers.
So you think that there should be more competition in the space, correct? Is that what you're saying? Okay, because to me it's like, why would the government have to get involved in this space in the first place, right? Why are the payment companies not just lowering these rates on their own anyway? Why wouldn't they just do it on their own?
So in some spots they are, not in every spot though. The Competition Bureau's market study on this in 2017 concluded that when it comes to payment processing in the credit card market, competition is fairly strong. It's probably still fairly strong today. Just for kicks, I went on Shopify's website and looked at all the different payment processors they have integrations with. There were way too many to count. The market has also started competing along non-price-based margins. So they don't only say, I can give you a better deal. They say, I can also do your inventory management. I can do your reconciliation. I can handle your fraud. They're competing quite viciously with each other for market share. Where we don't see competition is when it comes to some other payment systems that could be used as a way to compete with credit cards. In particular, our national payment systems, that real-time rail that everyone keeps talking about. Access to that thing has been restricted and controlled by the biggest banks in the country, who happen to make a lot of money from credit cards. So I think in this country we have a governance problem in the payment system, and nothing the government is doing right now is addressing that. And I think that is actually what the problem is.
Yeah, because like when I look at, I pulled some small businesses in my home community over this last week, talking to them about some of the fees that they paid in regards to Visa, MasterCard, Interac. Now, small sample, but basically when I factored out across the city of Swift Current, for example, 18,000 people, there was a couple hundred businesses in our town, very entrepreneurial city. Over a year, we're probably looking at close to $500,000 leaving the local economy just in fees alone, and that was just only on one aspect of fees. When you add all the other fees that are baked in there, we're probably over $1 million in fees leaving the local economy going to payment tech. Do you think that's reasonable?
I think overall, the cost of sending payments in this country and receiving them is probably higher than it needs to be. EY released a report a few years ago that estimated overall, like when we look across all the different payment instruments, the cost of sending and receiving money costs Canadian businesses $14 to $32 billion every 5 years. That's a non-trivial portion of GDP, and there's a lot more we can do to bring that down.
Tell me what is that the government is doing that is preventing from the system being developed. This is being developed by Payments Canada, whose members are all the financial institutions. I believe now the insurance companies are also the members there. Why do you blame the government for that?
It's pretty simple. The government created Payments Canada and said, on the one hand, you have this public interest mandate, but on the other hand, the biggest FIs in this country are going to fund you. They've created this irreconcilable tension and said to go off and do this. They've really created what is, from the outside looking in, a dysfunctional organization. So what has the U.S. done then under Fed now? In the U.S., the central bank has just come in and said, we're going to build this thing and you better
here also the Bank of Canada is a member there.
The central bank, in theory, there's nothing stopping the government from giving our central bank the mandate to do something like what we have seen in the U.S. I think at this point, it's the continued reliance on this broken governance model that's slowing down and ultimately damaging the promise of this real-time rail.
And again, second thing that almost every witnesses who come before the committee says that the government has to fund that, fund this. You're saying, I think when you're asking for the government more funding, at least the article your organization wrote, that 52% of Canadians, they don't know about they are not comfortable with open banking, and about 9% of Canadians, they are aware of open banking, and you want the government to fund for the education of this. The financial industry, financial institutions and the entire financial industries are making billions of dollars in profit. Can't the institution fund a bit of education for the consumers?
I think the industry certainly can. I mean, one of the reasons we endorsed the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada to be the regulator of open banking is because it's largely funded on a cost recovery basis. It does receive a small sum from the government for the purposes of education. We just asked for more money to be allocated for the purposes of open banking education.
Again, more money. I have a question for Ms. Margaret Yu of Momentum. Ms. Yu, government has taken steps to curb predatory lending under the high interest loan space. What do you think the government should do? What regulatory steps you think a government can do within the credit card industry?
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, we're absolutely pleased that the government has made the announcement to lower the criminal interest rate to 35% annual percentage rate, APR. I think the next steps is proposal to improve enforcement of the criminal rate of interest, which can be a very promising step for Canadians. in our experience, there are Calgarians that have taken credit cards that are higher than 35% annual percentage rate. One participant has taken a credit card at 36% APR that we know of.
Now, is there specific steps you have in mind or suggest to the government? Either you can give it now or you can give in writing to the committee later at a later date?
We can.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
My last question, I guess, is to Equifax Canada. Ms. Kuzmic, you did come with interesting statistics on the delinquencies, the credit card balances, etc. When you look over a period of last 5 years or 10 years, what is the trend? Is it going in one direction? Do you see the ups and downs? Any comment on the trend, please?
Thanks for that question. The trend is generally increasing in terms of both credit card usage, credit card balances, number of credit card accounts which exist. It is also important, though, to remember that there is a population component that contributes to that trend. So, for example, last year we had very high levels of immigration of newcomers to Canada, many of whom would be starting credit card accounts. So generally, I would say, yes, we do see increases in all of those figures.
Now, real-time payment system, when it comes into effect, where do you think will it have any effect on the usage of credit card?
I can appreciate that question. I don't have any data to be able to answer that effectively, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much, and I'll now turn it over to MP Perkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up a bit on my colleague, Mr. Patzer's questions, just to make sure everyone's clear on this thing. So the Liberal Minister of Revenue in 2023 changes the rules and allows the credit card processing fees now to be included in the GST, HST charges where they weren't before, correct? That's what you confirmed. And this happened about the same time. I think that the announcement was made in May 2023 that by the Minister of Finance that we would have this miraculous reduction in credit card payment processing fees for small business. Both happened at the same time. And I accept what you said, absolutely. Somebody's got to pay. This is a service, it's being offered, and the question is, where does it get charged? How does it flow through? And as part of that change, small businesses were allowed to do something they weren't allowed to do before, which is to pass that fee on to consumers on the transaction, and the GST and HST could be paid on that. Do you have any idea what the estimate was that new revenue source would present to the federal government in HST revenue?
I do not.
Okay, well, there are estimates from accounting firms that it's about $160 million. So this change seems to benefit the government, and that'll grow, obviously, as transactions grow, as value grows, that HST component that the government gets will grow. That's the beauty of the GST for the government, is that it grows as the economy grows. So as those transactions grow, that number of 160 million will grow. So that change gets made. And then what we have is we have a situation that says, oh, well, we're going to do this announcement that says we're going to lower credit card fees, or the processing fees for credit cards. And a lot of your members aren't agreeing to pass it on. Doesn't seem clear that anyone will pass it on. Is that correct? Except for the ones that have already committed to the government, which are about 4 or 5 companies, which aren't all, or most of them aren't your members.
I can't speak on who's decided to pass it on and who hasn't, because I'm not entirely sure myself at this point.